Hi, welcome to History for 6th grade. This is lesson 137, pages 263 and 265, stopping at the Space Shuttle Columbia. Okay, and we're going to look at these, move that map out of the way. We're going to look at a couple things that have happened in the recent times. So George W. Bush had just won the election, and he had made some promises to the American people when he campaigned, and that's what a politician does when they campaign, is that they make these promises, and some of them intend to keep their promises. Some of them do not really intend to keep their promises. Some really intend to keep them but aren't allowed to keep them because of certain things that they don't have control over. But there were some things that he promised that he was able to keep that. And so one of those was that he had made this clear stance against abortion, and there was some funding that the U.S. was sending to some organizations outside of the U.S. that was going to people that provided abortion. And so he actually cut that from cut off that U.S. money that was going towards that. Another thing that he did, that he was able to have the first substantial tax cut since the Reagan years, when Ronald Reagan was in office. And so he promised those tax cuts, and he was able to follow through. He promoted legislation to reform education and to increase military spending, to build up America's defenses. And those things were in place for quite a while until other presidents have taken some of those things out. But in 2001, during his presidency, we were attacked, and I've talked about this attack every year. I talk about it on September 11th. September 11th, 2001 was the attack on the World Trade Centers in New York, also the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And there was another plane, a fourth plane that was crash landed, and no one survived. 40 people died on that they think was headed for Capitol Hill or the White House. And so we look up here, September 11th, 2001 was a sad day in America. I do remember that one. We were headed to school, and when we got there, one of the other teachers had heard it on the news, and we got to look at that, and it was quite the tragedy. Both of the towers collapsed within hours of the hit. And the hits between the two towers were 15 minutes apart, and nearly 2,800 people died in those towers. That's not counting people that may have been in surrounding areas that got debris that may have died. And so we don't know the exact number of people that died. The Pentagon attack, there were 184 people that were killed in that. And then, of course, the 40 people from the plane there were actually brave men that were on that plane that overtook the hijackers, but there was no way to be able to land safely. The hijackers had disabled too many things, and so they had to crash it in a field in Pennsylvania. But they saved other lives by sacrificing their own there. So then we have this war on terror that began. So you have all these buildings that were damaged or destroyed, and things in New York and Washington, D.C. But Al-Qaeda, we found out, was behind the attacks with Osama bin Laden, who was their leader. And so we started this war on terror, going against countries that were for terrorism, that were part of the terrorists, and also countries that were hiding them. And so there was a radical group called the Taliban. They had taken taken hold of Afghanistan, and they had provided shelter for Osama bin Laden and his men, and so we launched an attack on that area, and Al Qaeda pulled out, and or the Taliban pulled out. I'm sorry, the Taliban fled, and Al Qaeda many of them were captured or wounded or killed, and but Osama bin Laden had actually escaped that from capture there. We again see Saddam Hussein, who was the dictator of Iraq, and remember we had beaten him back, where he was not going to attack, where he wasn't able to attack for a while. We had destroyed his weapons of mass destruction. Those were weapons that were designed to kill large numbers of people. And so we had destroyed that, but we heard word that he was building those up again. And so that was one of the things that led to the war on Iraq. And so the operation was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. And that was to free Iraq from the terrorist and Islamic hold that was there. And so the government, the Iraqi people were able to set up a new government, and they were able to hold the first free election in 50 years in January of 2005. Now, there were still some people that didn't want to be free. They were called insurgents, and they attacked both American people, soldiers there, and Iraqi people. But even in spite of all that violence, they were still able to hold those elections and be able to create a stable democratic government. And so that was a good thing that came from this. As we look toward the next election in 2004, our involvement in Iraq was a key issue. And so President Bush was up for re-election. Another president-elect was Senator John Kerry. He was a Democrat, and he held very opposite views from Bush. They held very opposite views on abortion, taxes, government spending, as well as the war in Iraq. And so many people predicted that Senator Kerry was going to become the next president, but President Bush received the majority of the votes, and so he was elected for his second term. And so then early in his second term, as we've seen with the previous president, he can elect, if there's a spot that opens up in the Supreme Court, he can elect a new Supreme Court justices. And so there were 2 spots that were open, and John G. Roberts and Samuel Alito were the 2 new elected justices over in the Supreme Court. And so the Senate does have to confirm those, but usually those go through. Some tragedies happened, some natural disasters. We had, actually before Hurricane Katrina, there were 4 hurricanes that hit, that in one season. Is the first time in 118 years that 4 have hit in one season. So they were Charles, Francis, Ivan, and Jean. They named the hurricanes, and so that sometimes can be helpful when you are studying them, because then you know which name it was. And hurricanes, depending on where they are, they can come and they can destroy houses, they can move things around, and many people can die during these 4 killed more than 100 people and caused over $25 billion in damages. You know, other states had extensive damage and loss of life as well. But then in August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit in the states of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. New Orleans is a city that is actually below sea level, and so they received quite a bit of damage from this. Mobile, Alabama, and Gulfport, Mississippi also had great problems due to this, but during Hurricane Katrina, more than 1,300 people lost their lives, and it was over $100 billion in damage. Katrina is the costliest storm in U.S. history, and so we look at that, and it was a great tragedy. There were many people, and I believe that there are still people that are that their situation completely changed, and they're in a totally different place now because of Hurricane Katrina. I'm going to ask a couple questions and then we'll close out this lesson. You do have a quiz next lesson, so make sure you study pages 259 to 263 for that quiz. Give the date when terrorists launched the deadliest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. That was September 11th, 2001. Who was responsible for the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001? It was Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden. What radical Islamic group was one of the first targets on the war on terror? The Taliban in Afghanistan. What was the name of the Iraqi dictator that was defeated during Operation Iraqi Freedom? Saddam Hussein. And who did President Bush defeat in 2004 election? That was Senator John Kerry. And name the costliest storm in U.S. history. That one was Hurricane Katrina. All right, don't forget to read these pages and study for the quiz next time. And we will see you.